everyone, my name is Ann Osganian. In this session, we're going to take a look at how you can use TimberScan Titanium for Sage 100 Contractor to not only streamline and automate your accounts payable approval process, you can use the TimberScan platform as your centralized electronic filing cabinet, allowing users to stay connected, organized, and ensuring information is available to all your stakeholders. Before I head into the application, I'm going to use this illustration to walk through the approval process and explain the steps. If we start over here on the right, we'll start from the time you receive an invoice. Now, the first step is getting invoices into the TimberScan system, and there's a few ways to do that. For those of you that have a centralized AP address set up for your vendors and suppliers, we have an email monitoring tool that will watch that email address, and as they're coming in, we can just take the attachments, or the invoices, and move those to a network folder that you designate. And then from within TimberScan, you can browse to that network folder and bring all of those invoices in at one time. You always have the ability to individually drag and drop invoices into TimberScan as well. And for the invoices that are still coming in hard copy in the mail, those you could just put on a scanner and bring them into the system that way. For the second step in the process, the data entry, a couple of key things I want to point out here. The first is that you can think of TimberScan as the front end to your Sage system. So over here is your Sage 100 Contractor application. TimberScan is going to be your front end for invoice entry and approval. We allow for partial coding of the invoice, which means that you can partially enter information on the invoice, and then the system will route that invoice for approval. And the invoice doesn't actually get sent to Sage until it's been fully coded and approved. We have access to all of your file maintenances within TimberScan, so we can see your jobs and your vendors and your GL accounts and your cost codes. We also have all of the same fields that you would see on invoice entry within Sage. So it's just as if you're entering that invoice within your Sage system. We also provide optical character recognition, or OCR technology. And what that allows us to do is read the text on those scanned documents as they're coming into the system, and we can transcribe that text and use it to populate the data entry. Right, so the OCR is designed to be a time-saving tool, not only time savings on data entry, but also on errors. We use the Google Vision toolset and what we call smart extraction technology to perform that text and character recognition. This means the OCR is going to identify data without having to have a template on file, but it also means that setting up a template is extremely quick and easy if you do choose to set one up. And we'll take a closer look at that when we head into the software. Once the system has enough information entered on the invoice to know what to do with it, we're going to route that out for approval based on your business rules. So you define how you want that workflow process to work, and then your TimberScan consultant helps you set that up as part of the implementation process. Your approvers don't have to be in the office to get their approvals done because TimberScan is a browser-based application. As long as they have access to the internet and a browser, they can get those invoices approved from anywhere using a smartphone or a tablet even. Once your invoices are approved, you can have a final review step if you choose, and that would just be an opportunity to have a final check on the invoice before it gets sent over to your Sage system. As you're going through your routing and approval, you can also attach supporting documents to that invoice. So essentially you're building a packet of information, and that can be anything that you want to collect and manage relating to that invoice. Could be purchase orders, receiving tickets, insurance documents, maybe lien waivers. And that packet of information is not only available within TimberScan, but it also gets sent to your Sage system and is available via the paperclip option within Sage as well. Once those invoices are in Sage, your process for selecting those invoices for payment and actually processing your payments, that's going to reside in Sage. So that process will stay the same. We do have a process within TimberScan to take those payment records and attach them to the invoice packet that you've created within TimberScan. So then the invoices, any supporting documents, your payment, that's all together in one nice packet, not only within TimberScan, but it's also available within your Sage system. So then you have everything together in one place from the time you get your invoice in the door over here in step 1, all the way through to you make that payment here in step 5. I'm going to touch on each one of these steps in more detail as we head into the application, and we'll go ahead and do that now. All right, this here is the TimberScan software. You'll notice over here on the left, everything that you need to access within the application is on this tree menu here. The first step in the process is to acquire some documents. So to do that, we hit the Acquire button. And the first thing we need to do is to assign a data entry group. And we need to tell TimberScan what it is we're acquiring. And our choices are an invoice, a document, or a check. Any invoices that you acquire into the system are going to end up in this AP Invoice Entry queue. Checks will come into the Attach Checks function. And any documents you acquire are going to end up in the Data Entry queue. We'll go ahead and acquire some invoices into the system. And what I'm going to cover first is the manual acquire process. Once I get through this, we'll look at our auto acquire feature, and that would allow you to bypass this manual acquire process. It just allows you to build another layer of automation into your workflow, and I'll explain how that works in more detail here in a few moments. So we're going to browse out to your network. So if you use the email monitoring, you're going to tell the system where to place those invoices. And then within TimberScan, we can browse out to this file, and you could say you want to bring in everything at one time, or you might just want to bring in, a few invoices. So we'll go ahead and select this 3, hit continue. This here is the acquire screen. I can make the invoice larger or smaller, and I have a number of annotation and control options available here along the top. As you can see, I could put ellipses, highlight, freeform text. I can put sticky notes, rubber stamps on there. I could add pages or remove pages. I can de-skew it if it came in a little crooked. Over here on the left, these are all of the pages that I just acquired. The first 2 are single page PDFs. Those came in as individual invoices. The third document was a multiple page PDF. So in that case, it came in as one invoice with multiple pages. If I click on each page, I can see I have invoice 393, and the second page is actually invoice 394. To make this its own invoice, I just right click and say I want to split. And now I have 4 separate invoices for processing. Once I've split my pages, I've made any annotations, I just go ahead and hit the acquire button, and the system's going to take this entire batch of invoices and move it to the data entry group that we assigned in the previous step. If you want to use the auto acquire feature and build another layer of automation in, this is designed to work with the email monitoring. This receiver email, this would be your AP address that you have set up. And this works in conjunction with the email monitoring tool. Instead of placing those invoices in that folder we just looked at, the auto acquire will do a handoff with your email monitoring. And it's going to go ahead and place those invoices in the data entry group that you've assigned here. If you just have one data entry group, you could use a wildcard and say everything that comes into this AP address is going to get assigned to this group. You also have the ability to note individual email addresses for your vendors or suppliers if you have any exception rules that you want to note. Down here, these are the options for splitting the invoices. So not only is the system going to assign it to the right data entry group, we're also going to split the pages based on the criteria you define here for your vendors or suppliers. You can have one invoice per file. So if your vendor is sending a separate file for each invoice, you can note a certain number of pages. If you know certain suppliers always have one-page invoices, or maybe for your reoccurring bills, utility bills, things of that nature, you might want to designate a certain number of pages. You know, as an example, if your electric bill is always 2 pages or maybe 3 pages, you can define that here. If you have vendors that are sending multiple invoices in a single file, we can also search for text. In this example here on page 1, or we're looking for page 1, so we know when we find that, that's when we need to split and we're on to the next invoice. The last thing the auto acquire does is it's going to send the invoices for OCR. If you have a template on file, it's going to read from the template. If there's no template on file for that particular vendor, then the smart extraction technology is just going to pick up what it can on that particular invoice. Next, we're going to take a look at the invoice entry. When you come into invoice entry, you can see your invoices in the card view, or you can select all and go right into the batch. So I'm going to do that here. For invoice entry, you have some options on how you view the invoices and your data entry grid. This is my data entry grid here at the bottom. I can change this if I prefer a side-by-side view. So in this case here, I would see all of the pages if this was a multiple page invoice. If it's a single page, you can collapse that to give yourself more real estate, and you can also collapse the tree menu. This would be your side-by-side view if you want your data entry grid on the side here. You could have it on the bottom as we just saw, or you can break it out into a separate window. If your AP department has dual monitors, you could have the full image of the invoice on one monitor and your data entry grid on a second. So some options on how you want that grid to appear. And then we also give you the ability to pick and choose columns. So if there's certain fields you're not using during data entry, you can simply get those out of your view. So really trying to streamline the entry process as much as possible. Now for this particular invoice, it's coming from Ellis Lumber, and we have an OCR template on file for Ellis Lumber. So in this case, up here on the top, this is all my header level information. So the OCR picked that up and did that, brought that in for me automatically. Now down here on the line items, we're not reading the actual line items on the invoice, but what we are doing is reading the purchase order number. So in this case, because the purchase order was on the invoice, the OCR technology read that, found the purchase order within your Sage system, and then brought in all of the purchase order lines here on the invoice. So then from here, I could just come in and update my quantities based on what it is I'm being invoiced for. If there's certain line items that are not on the invoice, I can just zero those out. But essentially, having most of that data entry done automatically for me using the OCR technology. Now, the next invoice here for Payne Electric, you can see I'm getting a message capture template wasn't matched. I don't have an OCR template on file for this vendor, but as you can see here, the smart extraction technology that I mentioned went ahead and identified key fields for me. Picked up the invoice number, as you can see here, the date, the due date, and my balance. Now, at this point, I can just finish entering the data entry and not set up a template. Or if I want to go ahead and set up a template for this vendor, maybe this is one I use on a regular basis. So from here, I can just go ahead and finish my entry. Now you'll notice here the Wood Elementary School is on the invoice. So I'll touch on that a bit more in a moment. For the description, we're going to put in electrical sub. Now, from here, I can go ahead and add a capture template on the fly. You can see the system went ahead and named it for me, identified my date format as well as my decimal separator. And once I hit OK, the system's going to go ahead and use that invoice as the basis as my template setup. And you can see here the Smart Extraction went ahead and pulled in key pieces of information, really making the template setup very quick and easy for me. These fields here in light pink, these are called anchors, and the Smart Extraction is going to try to identify key pieces of information so the system knows where the invoice is coming from. And I can add or change these. I might want to go ahead and remove, this address, but the Payne Electric address, that's probably unique, of course, to Payne, so we'll leave that. You could also identify other anchors. If you decide, maybe you always want to use the company name as the anchor, you might want to go ahead and just note that here. Once you've identified your anchors, if there's other data elements that you want to capture, you can have a description default. And then in this case, because the job location or the job name is on the invoice, we can set up another profile for Payne Electric. So to do that, we say we want to use that job name as an identifier, and that'll give us the ability to map this Wood Elementary School field to the job number in Sage. And that way, whenever we get an invoice from Payne Electric that has Wood Elementary School on it, it will automatically default my job number for me as well. Once I've identified all the data elements that I want to capture, I just hit save. And then the last thing I need to do, I just need to map my vendor number to the vendor name. So here you can see we have these plus buttons that we've noted. So I'm going to click on the plus button, and this allows me to map the vendor number in Sage to my default template profile. And then I can also go ahead and map the job number. So here I'm telling the system I want this job 207 to map to my Wood Elementary profile. Now from here, because we allow partial coding of the invoice, I could go ahead and route this off, and it would be sent to whoever the approver is for this job 207. If your workflow process is to define and enter the line item detail as well, I could go ahead and finish that here. And maybe your approver just, verifies that the cost code, and the cost type, and that is correct. So you can enter as much or as little information as you want before going and sending that invoice for approval. Some other things you can do from the invoice entry standpoint, you could attach supporting documents, you could add notes. If you wanted to come back to this later, maybe you want to put it on hold. If you had a question for, the vendor or somebody internal, you could come back to that at another time. Once you're ready to go ahead and route, you could go ahead and just save it. And that's going to go ahead and set up that template. Now, you'll notice here, I'm getting this duplicate invoice warning. So if you do have a duplicate invoice on file, the system's going to let you know that we're using the same validation logic as if you were entering that invoice directly into your Sage system. So I'm going to go ahead and just change the invoice number. And when I save this invoice, you'll notice I'm being prompted for supporting documents. So the system's going to go ahead and try to find any potential matches for supporting documents based on the information that was entered on the invoice entry. So in this case, it found a purchase order for Payne Electric. It's for this job 186. But from here, you can view the supporting document and decide if you want to go ahead and attach it to this invoice. Okay, since this is for the Williams Post Office job, I'm not going to go ahead and attach it in this instance. Now, before we look at the approval side, I want to spend a few minutes just covering the reports that we have available in the system. We have an invoice status by user report, and this is going to show me all invoices that are in the routing and approval process, and it's broken down by user. So here I can see Leanne has 7 invoices. This is the total dollars. I can link to the image of the invoice if I want to take a closer look. And I can also see when the invoices were assigned. So I can pretty quickly come in here and see if the user's been sitting on anything. Right, if I scroll down here, I can see Doug has 7 invoices, total dollars, but I have 14 invoices total that are in that review and approval process. Now, if I prefer to look at my invoices by project, we have the invoice status by job report. So it's going to show me the same information, but organized by job. So in this case, for job 186, the Williams Post Office, I can see I have 3 invoices, and this is the total dollars. For my Trap and Motel, I have 1 invoice, and for this job 207, my Wood Elementary School, I have 7 invoices. If you prefer to look at the information more in a dashboard format, we do have the workflow execution status. And this is not only going to show invoices that are out for approval, it's going to show other documents. So as I mentioned, TimberScan is not only a solution for AP routing and approval. You can store and manage any document within TimberScan, and you can also have workflows associated with any document. So in this case, I have some purchase orders, change orders, and drawings. We'll go ahead and just look at the invoices for now. This is going to show me all of the invoices that are out for approval. Okay, I'm going to collapse this to give myself some more room. And from in here, I have a number of options available. I can sort by ascending or descending. I can modify the columns that I want on my dashboard, and I can also filter. So if I just wanted to look at, maybe invoices by a certain job or for a certain vendor, okay? I can also build dynamic queries on the fly here, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if I look at the detail, I can see the image, I can see any notes. I can, if I wanted to come in here, I can sort by due date as an example. And then if I wanted to group by due date and, maybe by vendor. So again, I'm building these queries on the fly, and then I can, look at the detail. So I can see who it's routed to. And then I can also execute on behalf of a user. So this is controlled by security, but if I have security access to do so, this would give me the ability to go ahead and approve an invoice on another user's behalf. So if they were out on vacation or maybe out for the day, you can still keep those invoices moving. So that is the dashboard view, and this is more of, again, your management view to see everything. As an individual user, you would manage your day in the workflow task queue. Now, I'm going to go ahead and log out and log in as one of my approvers. And when I do that, you'll see here the menu has changed pretty dramatically. And that's because I have an approver role set up within the system. And I'm only giving my approvers access to certain functions. So in this case, they have access to the workflow task queue, the on hold queue, and the search. So if I come into my workflow task queue as a user, I'm going to go ahead and see all of the documents that are routed to me for approval. And I can look in the card view as I'm doing here. You could also look in the grid view if you prefer. And I have options for filtering. So if I only wanted to see maybe my invoices, and then you can also filter further. So if you wanted to filter based on a job number or a vendor, maybe a due date, and then you can also, do some keyword searching here. In this example, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this last invoice. So this is the invoice 110 that we entered for Payne Electric. And as an approver, I can come in here I can look at, all of my costing information, and if I want to go ahead and make any modifications. So, in this example, if I wanted to update my cost code, maybe I want to, assign this to, fields and sheds or site work. So I can go ahead and update the coding information. If, there was something not right about the invoice, I could go ahead and reject it. If I reject, I have to state who I'm rejecting it back to, and I have to put a reason why. I can also put it on hold. I could attach supporting documents using the supporting document option, but I could also add a page here. So if there was something that wasn't available under the supporting documents, I can just, browse out to my network and, attach a page that way. So anything I attach is going to appear here as another page to the invoice. I can also see all of the notes. So as an approver, I can see, all of the correspondence from the time the invoice was acquired into the system up until it was routed to me. I could send an email and the system will attach, the invoice to the email, and then it will also get logged under my notes option. Okay, we have tooltips available here for all the various shortcuts within the application. And we also provide the form view. So this here is my grid view. I can also look at it in the form view, and this was designed for users that are going to be accessing, use a tablet or a smartphone. The system's going to optimize and resize based on the device that you're on. So for users that might want to approve via a, smartphone as an example, you can access, the lines here in the grid view, or in this form view, which just makes it a bit easier based on, the amount of real estate you have to work with on that particular device. So I could come in here and, change my coding in that. Once the invoice is approved, if I'm the last approver in the workflow, then the system's going to go ahead and send that invoice over to Sage. If there's other approvers in the workflow chain, it's just going to send it to the next user in that particular workflow. When the invoice gets sent to Sage, okay, here's one that I had entered previously. We can click on that paperclip icon, and we're going to see that invoice packet. So you'll see the invoice, any supporting documents. So in this case, there was a purchase order that was attached to the invoice. And then once you actually select those invoices for payment and process your payments, if you attach the check record to that invoice, you'll also see that here in your packet of information. So you have that visibility not only within TimberScan, but also within Sage, which is really nice. Now, we'll take a look at how we got that check record attached to the invoice packet. I'm going to log out and log back in as my primary user here. If you're printing physical checks, when you print those checks, you're going to acquire them back into TimberScan. So here we're going to say we're bringing checks into the system, and you would either put them on your scanner and bring them into the system that way, or if you're putting those checks to a file, you can bring in the file. So in this case here, right, this is the file that was generated, and you would see all of the checks here. You do have to give it a batch name. So once you give this a batch name and acquire it, it's going to end up under the attached checks function here. So in this case, I have a batch out here called Leanne, and you would assign, pick your bank account and put the starting check number in. And here, if you had acquired 10 checks into the system, TimberScan is going to ripple through the 10 checks and attach them to any of the invoices that were paid. So in this case, this just paid the one invoice, but if this check paid 5 invoices, then this image is going to get attached to all 5 of those invoices. All right, so next we'll go ahead and take a look at the actual document setup. So just want to give you a little view here into the data structure. So within TimberScan, you can track and manage document categories and document types. I like to think of a category as your filing cabinet drawer, and then your types of documents as individual files within that drawer. So within my project management category, I'm tracking change orders, drawings, job checklists, and job photos. If we take a look at change orders here as an example, you'll notice the flag here can be a supporting document. So when we build that supporting document list that we saw in Invoice Entry and also for approvers, we're looking at this flag here, and we're looking at these data fields. So I told the system when I bring a change order into TimberScan, I want to capture the job number, the change order number, and the date entered. I've made the job field required, and the other 2 are optional, but you can make all of these mandatory. So when I bring it into the system, I need to enter these fields, and then when we're building that supporting document listing, we're looking at these fields for potential matches on the invoice entry screen, as well as this field here. This is also your search criteria that you can use later, if you want to retrieve this document down the road. These are all of the fields available within Sage, so you can choose as many of these as you want. You also decide which fields, or excuse me, which files in Sage you want to attach that document. So in this case, when I acquire a change order, I also want that sent to the job file within Sage, and you can pick, multiple files as well. I define the users that I want to have access to this type of document. If you're going to track items that might be sensitive in nature within the system, personnel documents, HR, maybe pay slips, you control, like I said, which users have access to those documents. So we give you the ability to set security. You can define if you want a workflow associated with the document type, as well as any routing rules. So in this case, Leanne is responsible for change orders for those projects. Doug is responsible for a different set of jobs, as well as Gary. So that's how the document structure works. And when we bring those documents into the system, they're going to end up here under the data entry queue. And just like our invoice entry, we can select individual documents, or you can select the entire batch. You have flexibility if you want the grid on the side or if you want it down on the bottom. And as I navigate through, so in this case, I have a lien waiver. And these are the fields that I chose to index for lien waivers. Okay, the next document here in my batch, I have a W-9. So in this case, we can see, the fields for W-9 are different. Once I enter that information, and again, these are lookups, of course, into Sage as well, so I'm picking from a valid list of vendors. Once I enter the information that's required, I can either route it or save it. If I don't have a workflow associated with this document, then it's just going to save it into my repository of documents. If there's a workflow, then it's going to go ahead and route that out for approval based on the workflow rules that I've established. Now, once those documents are in TimberScan, the last thing that I wanted to touch on is your searching tool. This sits across your entire repository of documents that you are tracking and managing within the system. This is very flexible. I can build queries on the fly. So if I just want to look at maybe all of my invoices, and I could add multiple conditions. So these are all of the fields that I can search by. I want to look at, invoice number, GL account, job number. I can say greater than or equal to starts with or contains, and then I can put a value. I could say, a job number. I can have multiple conditions. So if I wanted to look at all invoices for a certain job for a certain date range, I can do that. I can also, save queries. So if there's something that I'm looking at on a regular basis, I don't have to rebuild that query each time. I can go ahead and set it up. So in this case, I'm looking at all of my invoices for this job 215. This is also what I would use if I need to provide any kind of backup for T&M, cost plus work, or a loan draw. Once I've built my query, I'm just going to hit search. And the system's going to go out here and retrieve all of the results based on that criteria that I've defined. These are all the invoices. I can view the image from here. I can view the notes. And if I hit the show invoice report here, this is going to go ahead and build me a report for all of the invoices. So it takes a second for the system to generate. It's going to produce a summary of all of that invoice information, but it's also going out and gathering all of the images as well, not only the invoices, any supporting documents, as well as any check images that were attached to that invoice packet. Over here on the right, I can also give the report a title, and I also have a number of grouping options available. So here, this is my summary at the top. I have, $81,000 in invoices for this job 215. And if I want to go ahead and if I want to give it a title, and maybe I want to group it by cost code. And then if I want to remove any of these invoices, so as I'm looking at my summary, if there's invoices in here that I decide, I don't want these included in my packet, I can exclude those and I can just go ahead and preview to see the changes here that I've applied. Now I have my title on here, it's grouped by cost code. And then as we can see here, my dollars changed because I removed some invoices, and then I have all of my images as part of my report as well. And from here, I can just go ahead and create a PDF to send out, to my customer or to, to the bank if it's for a loan draw. So this is a really nice feature, can be a really big time saver if you need to, create those loan draws or provide substantiated billings for any of your customers. So in summary, using TimberScan's email monitoring, auto acquire, and OCR technology, you can save a significant amount of time on your invoice processing. You can automate your AP approval process, build an electronic environment for all of your documents, creating transparency within your company, and have all those documents that you need available at your fingertips. This concludes our presentation. I want to thank you all for watching. If you'd like to take a closer look at TimberScan or set up a personalized demonstration, please reach out to your representative at Practical Software Solutions.